promoting their plan. The Biden administration pushes the new infrastructure bill benefits. Capitol Hill concern. Why lawmakers worry about proposed payments to migrants. Iraq aftermath. Pope Francis offers prayers for the Prime Minister. And signs of life. People in Haiti track the fate of kidnapped missionaries. On EWTN News Nightly for Tuesday, November 9th, 2021. Thank you so much for being with us tonight on this feast of the dedication of the Basilica of St. John Lateran. I'm Tracy Sable. The Biden administration is promoting its infrastructure plan using comments from faith leaders who support the bill. And for the second day in a row, another cabinet official stepped up to the podium in the press briefing room trying to convince Americans that the massive spending bill Congress just passed was worth the money. White House correspondent Owen Jensen reports. Owen?
Tracy, good evening to you. Yesterday, you'll recall, it was the Transportation Secretary who was in the press briefing room, and today the Commerce Secretary went before reporters. This says inflation, clogged ports, and rising gas prices are hindering their messaging.
Secretary of Commerce Gina Raimondo tells reporters,
we will be able to close the digital divide, close the innovation divide.
One area getting big dollars, expanded internet access.
It's more important to get it right than to rush. So I think people will see their state putting together a plan. They'll see us starting to move out on that plan. But you know, not everybody's going to have broadband a year from now.
The White House also highlights faith leaders who support the bipartisan infrastructure deal, pointing out this statement from Sister Donna Markham, the head of Catholic Charities USA. The Infrastructure Act, with its focus on a clean environment, jobs, and expanded internet access, takes important steps toward making the economy work for everyone. However, what the White House did not point out is a recent statement from the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops regarding the other spending legislation known as Build Back Better. The bishops warned it would be a calamity if the important and life-affirming provisions in this bill were accompanied by provisions facilitating and funding the destruction of unborn human life. Overseas Vice President Kamala Harris arrives in Paris to shore up relations between the U.S. and France after a submarine deal was sunk, angering the longtime U.S. ally. The vice president will meet with French President Emmanuel Macron tomorrow. Today, she and second gentleman Douglas Emhoff toured the renowned Institut Pasteur in Paris. They talked with American and French scientists working on COVID-19 and global pandemic preparedness. The vice president's late mother, who was a scientist, conducted breast cancer research here with the Institute's scientists in the 1980s.
Now, during that news conference with the Commerce Secretary today, I asked her about people living in internet-dead zones, but she declined to take my questions. Meanwhile, tomorrow, President Biden heads to the Port of Baltimore as the administration tries to fix congested and aging ports that are impacting people's wallets. At the White House, Owen Jensen, EWTN News Nightly.
Well, as immigrants continue to gather at the U.S. southern border, the Biden administration has an idea to give money to migrants who entered the country illegally during the Trump administration. That idea is raising eyebrows from Republicans. Capitol Hill correspondent Eric Rosales reports.
The Biden administration wants to pay migrants who entered this country illegally under the Trump administration and were separated about $450,000 to $1 million per family. That's more than any 9/11 victim or Gold Star family receives. Republicans are firing back.
I couldn't believe that any fair-minded person would even consider this. And yet, the Biden administration is serious. They're really honestly thinking about doing this.
Other Republicans tell me they aren't amused.
I hear about it and I think, this is a joke, right? Surely we're not going to do this. You know, we got American taxpayers working every day to make ends meet, paying taxes, and their money's going to go to people who haven't done anything.
During the Trump administration's zero-tolerance effort, Homeland Security officials detained more than 5,500 people, including about 3,000 children who were separated from their families. The Biden administration says it's considering the idea to counter lawsuits brought by some of those families against the government. Lawyers are reportedly asking at least $3.4 million per family. Republicans tell me the hope of a large payout sends the wrong message to those who break the law.
If you start paying this kind of payment to to illegal immigrants, you'll be overwhelmed. Word will get out, go to America, and you'll get you'll win the lottery. Dumb idea. Hope it doesn't happen. If it does, there'll be a violent reaction in Congress.
28 House Republicans introduced an amendment to the National Defense Authorization Act to block President Biden's reported plan. Some civil rights groups backed the plan. The ACLU called on the president to not abandon, quote, a core campaign promise to do justice for the thousands of separated families. Days after the president denied reports of a payment program to migrants, he now says that migrants deserve some sort of compensation, although the White House has not determined the exact amount. At the Capitol, Eric Rosales, EWTN News Nightly.
Well, the Supreme Court heard oral arguments today for a case that could expand religious freedom rights for convicted inmates. The justices consider the question of whether a convicted inmate on death row should be allowed to have a pastor audibly pray and lay his hands on an inmate while that inmate is being executed. And joining me now is Andrea Picciotti-Bayer, director of the Conscious Project. Andrea, welcome back. Great to see you.
It is great to be here in person.
Great to see you indeed. Well, let's talk a little bit more about this case and why it's important when it comes to religious freedom.
Well, you know, Tracy, this is a very interesting situation, and it shows that most cases that get to the Supreme Court aren't easy cases. This is, again, the court having to balance religious freedom interests of the death row inmate, John Ramirez, versus the important deference that we give to prison officials, especially in this delicate matter, dealing with, you know, putting a man to death. The oral argument was very interesting, but I also want to focus a little bit on what brought this individual to death row and mention that the person that he killed, Pablo Castro, was a father of 9. It was done at a robbery, and he was able, you know, John Ramirez stole $1.25 out of Castro's pockets. His children have filed briefs with the court, and Justice Kavanaugh mentioned during oral argument the importance of closure for victims' families in this issue. So it's a very interesting matter, but that's got a lot of nuance to it as well.
Yeah, really difficult for sure. How do you think this is going to shake out, this case? I mean, I know it's hard to say, but how do you think the court will rule?
You know, it's very difficult, and I think that the court and all of the justices were struggling. Many of them were very active during oral argument. The first was a concern by Justice Kavanaugh and Justice Samuel Alito talking about the concern that they have for a flood of cases that could come to the court, raising what they're concerned about as maybe illegitimate claims of religious freedom. The second issue was raised by Justice Thomas, and that's the sincerity of Ramirez's belief. And Justice Thomas was concerned that perhaps he's gaming the system. Normally in religious freedom cases, the courts never question sincerity, but in these prison cases, sometimes you need to kind of peel back the onion. And the third issue was raised by, again, Justice Kavanaugh and Justice Barrett on how does the state respect the religious freedom rights of inmates and at the same time comply with their needs and their compelling state interests for order and minimizing the risk of something going wrong during these very important times, especially during an execution.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see, you know, what happens here. I want to switch gears a little bit. Over the weekend, as you know, the Federal Appeals Court issued a stay on the Biden administration's mandate for the COVID-19 vaccine. Interestingly, about a week or so ago, the Supreme Court actually shot down a request to block Maine's vaccine mandate for healthcare workers. And this case, I understand, specifically had to do with religious exemptions. Talk to us a little bit more about that.
Absolutely. Well, first it's important to note that the federal rule that's being promoted by President Biden does allow for religious exemptions. Maine, curiously enough, allows for a medical exemption, but not a religious exemption. So the request that was brought on behalf of Maine healthcare workers to the Supreme Court was a request to stay that state's mandate that all healthcare workers in many healthcare facilities be vaccinated by a certain period of time. And they said because of the lack of a religious exemption. It was a disappointing decision by the court not to take up the case on an emergency basis, but it's not the end of the story. This case will continue, and there are other cases that are raising these issues involving New York's mandate and Rhode Island. So I think in light of the fact that there are issues percolating up, it's really going to be a matter of time before the Supreme Court has to address this matter on the merits.
Yeah, and I know it's a really big deal in Maine. Speaking of Maine, we only have maybe less than a minute left, but I do want to get to this because I know this is a case that you're following as well. It has to do with school choice in the state of Maine. Tell us a little bit more about that.
Yes, see, on December 8th, the Feast of the Immaculate Conception, the Supreme Court will host oral arguments on Maine's school choice law that specifically prevents money from going to students that will attend religious institutions. And the state says that religious institutions aren't just because of their religious identity, but because of the religious nature of what they're doing. And that really involves the state kind of in getting into the middle of these curriculum. It's a second bite at the apple, I guess, for the Supreme Court to look at these issues. They did so last year in a case involving Montana's school choice. And I think if we're reading the tea leaves, the Supreme Court really will clarify that when states have school choice initiatives, they can't discriminate on the basis of religion.
And I know you'll continue to follow that, and we'll be following that as well. Andrea, thank you so much for your time and coming on. We appreciate it.
It's my pleasure. Thanks, Tracy.
Pope Francis is praying for Iraq's prime minister after Sunday's attempted assassination. The Vatican Secretary of State shared the Holy Father's expression of, quote, prayerful closeness to you and your family and to those injured. Mustafa al-Kadhimi suffered minor injuries from 3 armed drones which targeted his residence. 6 guards were wounded. Pope Francis hosted the prime minister at the Vatican last July. A vigil continues for the safe return of 17 captive Christian missionaries in Haiti. The group, including children, were kidnapped by a dangerous gang after they visited an orphanage nearly a month ago. Their captors are demanding $17 million to free them. The U.S. says that it will not negotiate as the search continues. Notre Dame University professor Karen Richmond reflects on the shortcomings of international aid efforts.
We need to stand with Haitians and support them and not have a sort of paternalistic attitude toward them, like outsiders know better. And again, we have to remember that the gangs have flourished really while there's been a strong presence from the much powerful international actors.
Now today, the U.S. alerted Americans in Haiti to strongly consider leaving that island. A fire at a school in Niger has left more than 20 children dead and dozens injured. A similar fire last April claimed 20 lives. Vulnerable straw huts are often used to ease overcrowding at schools. Separately in Niger, a partial collapse of a gold mine has killed 18 workers. Poland reports a calm situation on its eastern border today after deploying riot police for reinforcement. Yesterday, migrants from Belarus tried to cut through a razor wire fence. Our partners at the Catholic News Agency report that the Catholic Church in Poland has announced a collection for the migrants. Thousands are camped in winter conditions at the border, facing pressure from Belarus to illegally cross into the European Union through Poland. Britain's health secretary is announcing a new coronavirus vaccine mandate for all healthcare staff who work with the public, despite the achievement of 90% compliance.
That does leave, I think, around the latest number I have is I think 103,000 people in the NHS that work for the NHS that are yet unvaccinated, so not even one jab.
Unvaccinated workers will have until April to meet the requirement. Critics fear that the new mandate could cause many to leave their jobs. Protesters in California are speaking out against vaccine mandates. Hundreds of people gathered outside of Los Angeles City Hall on Monday after the city started enforcing strict new rules. Proof of full COVID-19 vaccination is now required to enter indoor restaurants, shopping centers, movie theaters, salons, gyms, museums, and other spaces. A new poll suggests that many Americans aren't as worried about COVID-19 as when the Delta variant was surging in August. According to the Axios Ipsos poll, 55% of people now believe returning to pre-pandemic life poses little or no risk to their health. In late August, only about 40% of people felt that way. When it comes to social activities, 61% of people say gathering with friends and family poses little to no risk. And 59% say the same about eating at a restaurant. Coming up, marking the 100th anniversary of relations between the Vatican and Switzerland, we have a report from Rome. The Vatican Secretary of State visited Switzerland for the 100th anniversary of diplomatic relations. Cardinal Pietro Parolin spent 2 days in Switzerland, where he visited a Benedictine community and took part in the celebrations of the centenary of diplomatic relations between the Holy See and the Swiss Confederation. EWTN News Rome correspondent Colm Flynn joins us now. Colm, great to see you. Can you tell us what's the significance of Cardinal Parolin's visit to Switzerland?
Good evening, Tracy. Well, the Vatican Secretary of State, Cardinal Pietro Parolin, who is, of course, the second most senior Catholic in the Vatican, he's in Switzerland at the moment to celebrate 100 years of diplomatic relations between the Holy See and the Swiss Confederation. Now, he celebrated Mass yesterday with the Benedictine community in the Marian Shrine of Einsiedeln. He was invited by Ignazio Cassis, who is the Vice President and Foreign Minister of Switzerland, to help mark the centenary anniversary of the opening of the Apostolic Nunciature to Switzerland and Bern. Yesterday, they started a 2-day conference at the University of Freiburg in western Switzerland on the historical reassessment of diplomatic relations.
And Colm, the government has decided that it will open an embassy to the Holy See. What else can you tell us about that?
Yes, it was just a month ago, Tracy, that the Swiss government announced plans to set up a dedicated embassy to the Vatican here in Rome. Now, currently, Switzerland's ambassador to Slovenia is responsible for their diplomatic ties to the Holy See. In the past, it has been the job of the Swiss embassies in Bern, Geneva and Prague, which countries do sometimes. They have an embassy in another country, work with the Holy See rather than having a dedicated one here in Rome. But this announcement of a new embassy solely dedicated to the Holy See is a strong vote of confidence from Switzerland towards the Vatican and a recognition of the importance of staying connected to the Holy See. And in a statement from the Swiss government, they said that this would make things more efficient as diplomatic relations have increased between the two states. And the new embassy will also manage relations with Malta and San Marino. And of course, Switzerland already plays an important role at the Vatican with the Swiss Guard, who protect Pope Francis and the Vatican.
And Colm, before I let you go, can you talk specifically about the current state of the Catholic Church in Switzerland?
I can indeed. The latest figures show that about 37% of people in Switzerland identify as Roman Catholic, and that's out of a population of about 8.6 million people. And the Benedictine monastery of Einsiedel, where Cardinal Parolin had Mass yesterday, they go back generations. They've had monks there for generations. In fact, in 1984, Pope St. John Paul II, he visited the same monastery, which is located right in the heart of the country. They have a Marian shrine there, and Cardinal Parolin expressed his pleasure at starting the visit there at the shrine. And Tracy, another hugely symbolic and important place to Swiss Catholics is Freuly-Frant. It's a pilgrimage site where St. Nicholas of Floy, the patron saint of Switzerland, worked 550 years ago. And Cardinal Parolin is expected to visit there as well.
Colm,
Tracy?
Colm, thank you so much for that report. Colm Flynn, EWTN News Rome correspondent. Thank you again.
Thank you, Tracy.
Up next, the Catholic Church in the U.S. is celebrating vocations this week. How the faithful can help out. The Catholic Church is celebrating National Vocation Awareness Week. This week-long celebration promotes various vocations such as the priesthood and the diaconate through prayer and education. The Catholic Church also prays for those currently discerning a vocation. And joining me now is Father Mark Ivany, Director of Priest Vocations at the Archdiocese of Washington and Director of Pastoral Formation at St. John Paul II Seminary. Father, welcome. So great to see you. Thank you for your time today.
Thank you for having me. It's nice to be with you.
So talk to us a little bit more about, why we have this week devoted to vocations and how is it important?
Sure. This week is important because, namely because of the shortage of priests and religious within the church. Interestingly, we could now propose that perhaps we need one for marriage as well. It was almost kind of a given that the sacrament of holy matrimony was on the minds and the hearts of young people, and and that's what they were working towards. And then from that, group, perhaps God would call, men and women to religious life, or young men to the priesthood. But I think in the church in general now, we really need to be reminded of what a vocation is in general, and then within that, priesthood and diaconate and religious life.
Yeah, I was going to ask you, that was kind of segueing right into my next question. Traditionally, when we think of vocations, we probably think of becoming a priest or a nun, but there are other paths. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Sure. And just to be clear, this week is, National Vocation Awareness Week for the priesthood and religious life. But as we were saying, given the crisis of marriage these days, it's an important thing to talk about. And so I appreciate the question, because even as a vocation director of priests, priests come from families. It's of the 50 seminarians that we have here at our seminary, very few of them come from, single parent homes or, homes of divorce. Now, of course, there's many heroic, saintly men and women in those situations, and I don't want to take away from that at all. But in general, it's been the reality that vocations to the priest and religious life come from strong, faithful Catholic homes. So just another reason in this week of National Vocation Awareness Week that we can also be talking about good and faithful marriages.
Yeah, and what advice would you give to those who maybe are discerning a vocation? How do you know if God is calling you to do that?
Yes. There's many different ways that a person will come to know that they are, being called to the seminary, to the priesthood through the seminary or the religious life. But there's a few things that help all people to figure that out. The first and foremost would be the sacraments. Another one is Eucharistic adoration, daily Mass, devotion to the Blessed Mother, especially within the use of the Rosary, and good solid spiritual direction and spiritual reading are all things that individuals can do to fertilize or cultivate the ground around them, if you will, to help figure that out. And as well as, I should have mentioned, as well as helping the less fortunate, doing acts of charity. All those things really put a person in a place where they can hear God's call.
And we don't have a whole lot of time left, but I'm really hoping, if you don't mind, could you share with us your vocation story?
Sure. I was raised in a great home. I had wonderful parents, and I had a great view of what it means to live a sacrament in a sacrificial way. I actually strayed a little bit. I never left the church or anything, but I was not as active in my faith in the college years. And through a really wonderful priest, I was invited back, and through the sacrament of reconciliation, and learned how to pray at a deeper level. And then after pursuing in a more direct way the virtues and just a virtuous way of Christian living, as I said earlier, I was kind of doing the things that allowed me to put myself in a place to hear God's call. And while I was still attracted to married life and to be a husband and a natural father, there was just something inside, Tracy, I can't really explain it, that just kind of was whispering that there's something more, that there's a slightly different path for me to holiness and to service within the church. And I'm so grateful for my parents and for that priest and for everybody else that allowed me, helped me to recognize that and follow it.
Well, thank you so much for sharing that with us. That really means a lot, and speaking with us about all this today. We appreciate your time, Father.
Great to be with you. And thank you to everyone listening and or watching that prays for vocations to the priest and religious life. Thank you.
And we thank you for watching tonight. For the entire EWTN News Nightly team, I'm Tracy Sable. Good night and God bless.